Argentina's struggling economy. What went wrong? This is Argentina, a South American nation that has hosted an unprecedented period of sustained growth, quintupling its size in the last decade. This nation has shown remarkable resilience through financial crises, and even though it has changed 5 presidents in 2 weeks, its continuous reinvestment in itself has paid off multiple times, as average incomes have doubled in the same period of time, creating fantastic increases in the quality of life for all citizens of the nation, or at least that would have been the video we were making a few years ago. Unfortunately, today Argentina's economy tells a very different story. Just as the economy rose to these great heights, it has crashed back down, bringing a period of high inflation and widespread poverty. But perhaps this should not be a great surprise. Over the last 100 years, Argentina's economy has been characterized by periods of massive growth followed by enormous declines, making the last few decades little more than a continuation of that unfortunate trend. This is a real shame because Argentina obviously has much to offer, from a healthy population of productive workers, strong reserves of natural resources, and even a landmass that is very suitable for fundamental industries like production and agriculture. But despite all these advantages, Argentina has repeatedly fallen into this unfortunate pattern and is now on the brink of becoming a failed state in every sense. The Nobel Prize-winning economist Simon Kuznets is said to have observed in the early 1970s that there are 4 types of economies in the world: developed, underdeveloped, Japan, and Argentina. We have already explored what makes Japan so strange, but to unravel the mystery of Argentina, we need to understand some specific problems. What caused the various economic booms over the years? What caused the subsequent economic declines? And why is this most recent recession just a bit different? Once we have done all this, we can get to the fun part and place Argentina in the national economy ranking explained. What do you think about a 2020 finale? This video is brought to you by Acorns, the investment platform trusted by over 8 million people, not to mention me and the team here at Economics. If your goal in 2021 is to create wealth, but let's say you don't have much to start with or simply don't know where to begin, then you should absolutely check out Acorns. Acorns makes it incredibly easy to start investing with features like Smart Deposit. You can automatically move a portion of your paycheck into your savings, investment, and retirement accounts simply by snapping a photo of your check or setting up direct ARC deposits. And as if that weren't enough, you can also invest in your future with roundups. Here's how it works: just link your existing debit or credit card to your Acorns app, and then spend as you normally would. Yes, that's all you have to do. The next time you swipe your card or make a purchase online, Acorns automatically rounds up the difference, putting aside the spare change directly into your diversified portfolio. I would be negligent if I didn't mention that you can also use your Acorns heavy metal debit card, but we'll talk more about that in detail at the end of this video. Don't hesitate to sign up now at acorns.com, and Acorns will deposit $5 into your investment account to help get your portfolio started. This is Acorns. It may seem incredible today, but at the beginning of the 20th century, Argentina was one of the 10 richest countries in the world. Its national industries, which primarily revolved around high-end agriculture, had greatly benefited from an influx of investments from Europe and America. The nation was able to adopt modern commercial agriculture techniques. This worked particularly well considering that those same countries that had invested so heavily were also fantastic export markets that, through their economic growth, had developed a certain taste for red meat, which before then was seen as a luxury. This growth was further accelerated by massive European immigration to the nation, which brought even more money from people seeking to build a new life. Overall, this was fantastic, and in 1905, the average Argentine was as rich as the average citizen of France, Great Britain, or Germany, and only slightly poorer than the average American. There was a small asterisk next to this success, however, which was that the politicians and business leaders overseeing this growth were extremely corrupt, and the wealth that the nation was growing was distributed very unequally and went primarily to the aforementioned European immigrants. This would not necessarily have been a long-term problem, as the nation was still becoming richer and even the people at the bottom of the ladder were enjoying a higher standard of living. But obviously, it did not last forever. The First World War was, let's say, an interesting period for Argentina. The country remained totally neutral, but that does not mean it was not heavily influenced by the fallout of the war. For starters, due to a massive influx of European immigrants, many of whom came from nations that were now at war with each other, it found that its population was rather hostile. A much more tangible effect was that all the nations that had pumped investment capital into Argentina and bought all their exports were now bankrupt due to having to fight the biggest and bloodiest war in history up to that point. This pushed the country into a long period of stagnation that was only worsened by the Great Depression of 1929. Luxuries like red meat on the table and foreign investments quickly went out of fashion. This was a real problem for the nation's leadership. Not only were they no longer able to become incredibly rich thanks to Argentina's success, but the people of the nation who had been enjoying second-hand wealth were becoming increasingly restless. A solution was needed, and fast. So, a series of trade agreements were instituted with the European nations to try to reignite the growth of the previous decades. Unfortunately, these trade agreements were very one-sided and primarily served to solve the problem of corrupt politicians not getting rich rather than the problems of a nation losing its primary industries. The most famous example of such an agreement gave the United Kingdom, with its asymmetrical flag here, exclusive rights to sell coal to Argentina and also gave British companies the right to buy and control the Argentine meat industry. Sure, this gave the country a small boost in exports, which was very important, but it also ceded Argentina's primary industry to a foreign power, which was terrible. It was such a poorly planned agreement that corruption was really the only reason Argentine leaders would have been forced to accept such onerous conditions. In any case, these agreements further accelerated the nation's decline, which gave rise to increased civil instability and a series of political coups. Political instability, which involved the forced removal of a government, was never a good look for the international community, and foreign investors in the nation quickly dried up. This was a real problem because, at that time, the nation was desperately trying to industrialize other sectors of the economy to compensate for the meat industry that was falling more and more into the hands of international companies. This eventually led to the election of Juan Perón, who introduced sweeping economic reforms with a particular interest in building a nationalized heavy industry. This sounds very much like someone else you might know from that period. For what it's worth, this tactic of nationalizing everything that was foreign-owned and pumping money into building industry worked for a while, but once the other nations recovered from the Second World War, they were very upset because all their foreign assets had been stolen. To add insult to injury, Argentina was more than happy to extend an open invitation to German Nazis whom the world had just fought so hard to defeat. For this reason, no one wanted to invest in Argentina or buy anything they were producing in their new luxury factories, and for a nation that depended heavily on exports and foreign investments, this was a hard blow. The nation quickly became very poor again, and the popularity of the new radical leader collapsed along with it, leading to another political coup by a subsequent line of strong figurehead leaders with the secret solution to fix the nation. At this point, you should be starting to get an idea of Argentina's narrative in the 20th century. Radical reforms to correct minor problems meant that more harm than good was done, and these harms were subsequently repaired by more radical reforms that did more harm than good. The nation bounced back and forth for the rest of the 20th century, swinging from a total command economy to basic laissez-faire capitalism. Now, all regular viewers of this channel will know what I am about to say. This kind of back and forth has decimated the nation's stability and the confidence that people had in it. People do not want to invest or start families, careers, and businesses in a country that could be turned upside down at the next election. They do not want to save for retirement under a regime that might loot their piggy bank, and international organizations do not throw money at a nation that will give them nothing in return. So yes, stability and confidence, no great surprise. But what if we looked a little deeper? Remember that Argentina was a rich and stable nation. So what caused its decline while other similar nations like Canada and Australia continued to sail with their prosperity intact to this day? To answer this question, we need to consider the Argentine Paradox. The real reason behind Argentina's continued economic instability is a point of great debate among a host of economists, much like Japan's 3-decade stagnation. No one knows for certain, but there are some prevalent theories. For economists who have primarily examined the Argentine economy in contrast with Australia and Canada in particular, which were all very similar entities at the beginning of the last century, they all had modest populations, they all had a large population of European settlers, and they all had a healthy collection of natural resources and agricultural land. So, the question was, what made the difference? The first proposal advanced by Gardio de Tilla, an Argentine economist and businessman, was that the main difference between Argentina and other settler societies like Australia and Canada was its inability to seek adequate alternatives to compensate for the end of geographic expansion with the closing of the frontier 100 years ago. These countries were all much less utilized than they are today, where nearly every square centimeter of land is somehow exploited, primarily for agriculture. Once upon a time, these nations all had policies where if you could go out and find a piece of unused land and turn it into a farm, it was all yours. The problem was that Argentine farmlands are much more cultivable than the farmlands in Australia and Canada, and also by virtue of the fact that the country is smaller, much less available. This, over time, meant that Argentina had fewer farmers with more land and influence rather than more farmers with less influence. Add a healthy dose of anti-competition and corruption, and tardy, suddenly this nation's primary industry is built on a fundamentally unstable platform. Another popular theory is that the nation's political climate and systems were not as well equipped to handle the new political landscape of an increasingly globalized world. Both Canada and Australia actually have political and legal systems approved with respect to the British style of Westminster government. This system is not at all perfect, but it primarily promotes stability and balance of power. It also promotes systems that are put in place to handle international entities. As you know, the English were very interested in this. In contrast, Argentina had its political systems handed down primarily from Spain, which adopts a more brusque approach to international policies and has much less institutional emphasis on political stability. This is a slightly controversial theory, but for what it's worth, former British colonies have an average GDP per capita almost 50% higher than former Spanish colonies. But perhaps the most compelling argument came from a 1992 paper published by a research team from the University of Madrid, which highlighted that property rights were the thorn in Argentina's side. Remember how the nation's assets continued to be claimed by the state and then privatized and then claimed by the state and then privatized again and again. Well, it turns out that this makes people not really want to invest in your country, which is really bad. Borrowing for growth is an essential part of managing a healthy industrial economy, but this health depends greatly on the conditions you get for the loan. At the individual level, if you were a skilled worker like a doctor or a dentist or even a merchant, and someone offered you a business loan at a 2% interest rate for a period of 40 years to open your business, you would be foolish not to accept that deal. As long as you provide a good service, you should easily be able to make those repayments and become richer in the long term as an entrepreneur rather than as an employee. On the other hand, if someone offered the same loan but it had to be repaid with a 20% interest rate in a period of 5 years, well, all of a sudden it would be much less enticing. Not only is the interest higher, but the whole thing has to be repaid more quickly, which means that those monthly repayments could easily be much higher than what the business could ever make. The same kind of heads or tails exists at the national level. Historically, Very stable nations like the United States and, yes, Australia and Canada can borrow money at very low interest rates for a very long period of time. But if investors look at Argentina, they will see all these nationalization activities and be rather scared of investing. If they put their money into the nation, they will want higher returns and will also want to have that money quickly before some new government comes along. So, in the long term, Australia and Canada get to be happy small entrepreneurs, and Argentina has to be forever the national equivalent of an employee who could not take a break due to their low credit score. Of course, there have been many historical footnotes that have accelerated these problems, not least the start of a war with their longest and most faithful trading partner, but a combination of these three factors is at the root of the nation's economic problems, or at least it was, because today Argentina might find itself facing a very different problem, a currency crisis. The most recent crisis began like many others before it, when it became obvious that Argentina would elect a new president with a more left-leaning political position than its incumbent opposition. One day after the primary elections, the Argentine stock market crashed by over 48% as investors feared they might be caught in another cycle of nationalization. The difference this time is that its currency was put at risk without a real plan to save it. In the early 1990s, the Argentine peso was pegged to the US dollar at an exchange rate of about 3-to-1. This decision was made in an attempt to protect against inflation, and it worked reasonably well. Fixed exchange rates involve the home nation, in this case Argentina, maintaining enormous piles of foreign currency that they want to fix against, in this case US dollars, always being there to honor that exchange rate of 3-to-1. The market more or less lines up because no buyer will accept less than 3 pesos for a dollar, and no seller will accept less than a dollar for 3 pesos. We explained how fixed exchange rates work in much more detail in our video on Entropia Universe of all things, so if you are still confused, go watch that. But in short, as long as people believe that a government can honor the currency exchange, they will say that will be the currency conversion, and sometimes it works so well that the government does not even need to be involved. People will simply change the price agreed upon of their own accord. Unfortunately, this system collapsed during the last economic crisis in 2001, where people rushed to change their pesos into US dollars until the Exchange Council completely ran out of reserves. At that point, the Argentine peso effectively became a floating currency despite the government still doing its best to support it. These efforts include offering the highest interest rate in the world ever. Feeling cheated by your own country's banks offering only half a percentage point of interest on your savings, if you are lucky, well, in Argentina, you can get up to 25%. The only catch is that deposits must be held in Argentine pesos. The reason this has become a problem is that this attempt to control the Argentine peso has done little if not pump a lot of American money into circulation. Given the nation's historical instability and the rapid decline in the value of the peso, people are moving to do more and more business in US dollars rather than with the Argentine monopoly money. Today, Argentina effectively has a dual currency economy. Argentine pesos are still used for normal daily activities like grocery shopping or paying for a taxi, but for more important transactions like buying a house or a car, or even payments, they are made in US dollars. If this becomes widespread enough, eventually people will no longer recognize pesos for anything, and Argentina will become the largest economy in the world to not have control over its own currency. Now, using a foreign currency is fine for small nations that do not really have the ability to manage their own internal economic policies. Places like Monaco and even Montenegro do just fine. But if Argentina cannot raise taxes or provide fiscal stimulus or borrow in its own currency, it will effectively become a dead state, one obstacle away from complete implosion. And if history is anything to go by, there are plenty of obstacles coming. We would like to know about your experience regarding the topic covered today. Share it with us in the comments, and, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask them. We will gladly respond. Your like would be a source of satisfaction for us, and of course, Do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming publications.